The Democratic Party is lost. They are adrift. They have been in the political wilderness, as we call it in the biz here, for the better part of 2 years, even maybe more than 2 years at this point, depending on how far back you want to go or when you want to start your clock. The problem is they're 6 months out from the midterms. There's no clear leader of the party. There's no clear message. There's no clear promises to voters on what might happen should Democrats retake the House, which they're expected to, and maybe retake the Senate, which is now very much in play come November. In recent weeks, the party has been plagued by bad headlines, poor fundraising, headlines and stories, and bad interviews with the head of the Democratic National Convention, which isn't entirely the full party, which my guest and I talk about today, but also is where most people think the heart of the party is. The head of the party is refusing to release the 2024 autopsy of what went wrong with the Harris campaign, and their playbook for Democrats and donors and candidates going forward is lacking. I read it. It's long. It's 208 pages long, but it doesn't have a lot to say about voters or how to address the voters that they've lost or keep the ones they have. Instead, they're fighting over what to do next and how they should approach what is going to be a very different America post-Donald Trump. It's why my guest today is the former presidential campaign manager and Democratic strategist Maya Rupert. She's got a brand new book out called The Real Ones, all about authenticity in politics, specifically on her side of the aisle, but there are a lot of lessons for all politicians and for all of us to think about what we want from an authentic leader and what that means when it's coming out of the mouths of different kinds of leaders, maybe the kinds of leaders we don't always think of as maybe president or our senator or our representative. But we talk an awful lot about the root problems right now. What's going on inside the party that's left them so adrift, and why can't they get their act together, and why she thinks that turning to individual authenticity instead of a one-size-fits-all approach, which is kind of what the Democrats have been doing for the last few years, maybe if not the last couple decades, why she thinks this new approach is the better one for our current moment. It's Friday, May 8th, 2026. I'm Grant Hermes, and this is Make It Make Sense. Well, Maya, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Truly, thank you for having me on.
Yes. Oh, and who was joining us? Who was?
This is Crispin. She's gonna play a part in this interview, whether I like it or not.
Wonderful. So, Your adorable cat, Crispin.
Yes.
Mine is behind the camera over here somewhere, just watching.
He's lovely. Kind of directing.
Love Maybe he'll be around my feet probably at some point. Okay, so I want to start this conversation here with, it's been a difficult year and a half for Democrats right now, the Democratic Party, I would say, which to me has been unable to find its way out of a paper bag without a map right at this moment. There doesn't seem to be a clear leader. It doesn't feel like there's a real way forward. And I think a lot of Democratic voters are looking for that right now. So what do you see as the state of the Democratic Party right now?
Well, I definitely agree. It's been hard trying to find leadership. And I think it's because, honestly, I don't think we've really grappled with how much the electorate has shifted, and that is especially true among Democrats. Things that were just sort of political certainties only a few years ago have completely changed, right? The way that people talk about Gaza and therefore the support for Israel, the way people are talking about affordability and what is sort of allowed as just, well, that's just what happens versus, no, government has a responsibility to make it possible for people to live comfortable lives. All of these things, these giant sort of pieces of political philosophy have really gotten reshaped recently. And the good part about that is I feel like people's political imaginations are expanding, and that all sorts of ideas can come to the table that maybe looked fringe before. But that also means a rejection of leaders who are telling us, well, that's not the way things are done. And that means there's going to be a moment here where we feel a little rudderless. But I actually feel like that's the rudderless that has to happen for big shifts to occur. So I almost feel like in this moment, like what we're seeing, I think we're going to, people are sort of listening to voters. I think we're going to see some big wins during the midterms. And then I think we're going to see what will be one of the most significant in shaping the future of the Democratic Party elections in 28 that we have seen in a really long time. So I think I agree with the assessment that it is sort of this lost moment, but I think that what can come out of that is really exciting.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the thing that I think about, and as I'm looking at these things and comforting these things, is that the current leadership and the current structure of the DNC and the folks at the top of that right now are holding on to these ideas so hard. I mean, I read the playbook that Ken Martin put out, the DNC chair, and in that thing, it's comprehensive, but it feels a little empty. And I don't know if you listened to his recent interview on Pod Save America with Jon Favreau, which I thought was really insightful for lots of reasons that I'm not always sure that Ken Martin wanted them to be insightful. But I thought his message, a lot of times when he was talking about where the party was heading, was all about how they were interacting with donors and leadership and other members right now, which is important. And those stakeholders are important. But there was so little talk about responding to voters and actual members of the Democratic Party who are just the electorate writ large. And so that idea of expanding political imagination on things like Gaza and our the United States relationship with Israel, which I think is the sticking point for a lot of Democratic voters right now. I mean, I'm sitting in Detroit. I am 15 minutes from Dearborn, Michigan, right, where the heart of that movement is in the United States. And so, that's at the forefront of my mind here. But it feels like, you're describing growing pains, and that almost feels maybe too small, or is maybe we're just getting into this moment and that's just how this is going to work.
I mean, I think growing pains is that probably is too small. I think we are talking about something that can be sort of seismic, right? I think that the resurgence of populism in the Democratic Party is one that can really sort of it can reshape what the party is talking about and doing and who we're speaking to. I think that in recent years that has shifted, and I think there are a lot of reasons for that. Some of them good, I think some of them very misguided, but I do think that we're in a moment right now where voters are making their voices heard, right? I think Donald Trump got elected with a coalition of voters that people have said, had historically been Democratic voters, but had sort of, hadn't felt like they had a political home for a while. Now, I think we're seeing the limitations of that coalition being brought together by Donald Trump, because you simply cannot say that you're going to make life more affordable for people and then enact tariffs that essentially tax working people, right? Like, I think that the limits of him lying to people we're seeing the cracks in that coalition.
Yeah.
But what it did was make everyone hyper aware that there were a group of people who were not hearing from anyone that your priorities are our priorities. And whether, I know a lot of Democrats have felt like that wasn't entirely fair, and they were talking about some of these issues, but I do not think that we have ever matched the urgency in what people are feeling with policies that were being suggested. So I think what we're seeing is both, it's a reframing and sort of centering poor and working people in our politics, but more than that, it's about the ideas. I think we're seeing people be bolder because people are saying it's not enough to hear, don't worry, we'll build more housing in the next 5 to 7 years if I can't pay my rent and feed my family right now. So what are the ideas that are going to make it easier on people now? And I think that shift is going to be monumental for regular people. And if people can start seeing the benefits of our politics, that's how we get people more engaged.
There's this thing too that I think about, specifically the last, I don't know, let's say maybe 15 years of Democratic stance and policy from a party standpoint, right? From how the DNC approaches Democratic voters, which is this thing where they kind of Moneyball approach it, where they try to talk to individual blocks of voters and their specific issues instead of trying to just talk to voters through the ideas that they have, so the voters see themselves in those ideas. And I think if there's any spot in which you can give Donald Trump credit, especially when he was building his coalition in 2016 or 2015, that is kind of what he captured, along with the racism and xenophobia and those other things, right? So there's that there too. But like this other thing, was that there is a, and I think we're saying the same thing here, which is the sense of urgency and immediacy hasn't been captured by the ideas. I think it's sort of a forest for the trees problem. Do you get a sense that the Democratic Party in this moment is trying to find a way to shift out of that? Because I didn't get that sense reading the actual playbook itself or hearing from leadership right now.
Look, I think that looking to the Democratic Party or like the DNC to do things is not how I think we're going to actually see the future of the party.
Hmm.
I think that folks at the DNC who are working at the DNC are some of the most committed people who are trying to do this work and
Sure.
are doing it and doing it as well as can be within a bureaucracy that is supposed to represent a party and not right. It what we need to look to is how are people running? And I do think that, the DNC has been slow, and I think institutions are slow to embrace change. But I think that what we're seeing across the country is that people are running, and the alignment is, I mean, it's sort of, there's still the people talk about it in terms of progressives or moderates, but really what it is, are you ready to up in the status quo or not? Are you ready to move with this kind of speed? That's where I would say, look at the people who are running and look at the people who are being successful and what are voters saying there, because that's the future leadership of the Democratic Party. It's not housed as the chair of the DNC. It's who are voters gravitating toward. And we are going to need to, I think that's it's sort of moving day. Like we are going to have to shift what the party is doing because we need to be responsive to what voters are asking for.
Do you think that then means shifting or it being moving day for leadership in the Senate and in the House? I mean, there's a lot of talk about Chuck Schumer. I personally don't think Chuck Schumer is going to get reelected as majority leader again. I think his days are numbered for that. Jeffries, maybe not. But certainly it seems to have been his job to slap the hands or wrists of members that have overextended past what he's wanted frequently. And if there is this sort of groundswell of people willing to push the boundaries that you're talking about here, it would seem that maybe he also needs to be pushed out as well. But I don't get a sense that might be coming. But I don't know. What are you also hearing about that?
I definitely agree that people have looked at Chuck Schumer and the way he's approached some issues and are just recognizing he is a leader for a different time.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that is true. I think that is how he is being perceived, and I agree. I don't think he gets reelected as leader. Now, for Hakeem Jeffries, I think he has been doing this for less time, right? So I do think that there are people who are sort of saying, all right, is he going to step up and step into this moment? Or are we going to see somebody who is trying to insist on a style and a type of politics that just should not exist in the moments following what we've just been through? I think that what we have to look at is we are entering an era where Donald Trump will not be on the ballot, and the Republican Party is going to be trying to figure out how it remakes itself.
Right.
And the Democratic Party needs to be willing to take this moment and take real advantage of it and fight for people and not revert to a status quo that was clearly not working, and not let Republicans who just allowed someone to run roughshod over everything guilt them into saying, all right, it's time to get back to normal now that we have taken over. And this is the hard part. It will be the same people. It will be the same people that just excused Donald Trump saying, hey, come on, we're going to calm our radicals down. You guys do the same. And we need somebody who's going to say, no, we need balance. We need to rebalance this, and we need to do it for people. We need to, if we're going to break the status quo, we need to do it in favor of regular working people. And so I make room for the possibility that Hakeem Jeffries could be that person. But that, I think, is what they're going to have to show. Leaders right now are going to have to show that they're up for leadership in this moment. And it's not going to look like it's looked before. And people are going to be frustrated with, okay, the fever's broken. We need to get back to normal, because normal was clearly not working for people.
Yeah. I mean, I this last week, Jeffries, I don't remember what he was on, but I saw the clip of it where he said that affordability was the number one priority, not accountability for the president post whatever, or even impeachment should Democrats win the House in November, which it looks like that's going to happen. Although we're going to talk about Louisiana v. Callais in a second here. And so I know, deep breaths. But, and while affordability is always everyone's number one issue for these things, when you actually talk to Democratic voters, and then For the People had a poll that came out recently, the majority of voters still want accountability. If it's not their top issue, it's their number two issue. And I think that maybe almost treating affordability as their priority issue is kind of a cop out to this thing and feels like a less strong stance to what you're talking about here. It's not that it's not important. It's just that it's not this new wave of leadership. And so I don't know. I'm just curious if you think that there is an appetite for that kind of thing that feels way more aggressive than a Democratic Party that I've certainly seen in my lifetime.
I think there's huge appetite for it. I think people do want accountability, and these things aren't unrelated. People want affordability, but it's more than just my prices went up and it's too much, right? What people are saying is that I am seeing an economy that works one way for me and my family and a very different way for other people. During COVID, people, I think a lot more working people realized how close we all are to each other who are working for a paycheck than we ever will be to the folks who aren't, right? The idea that a lot of people recognizing, wow, actually a couple of paychecks and I wouldn't be able to make rent, was a sobering reminder of that reality. And if you see two economies, if you see we're dealing with, can we keep our place while now, CEOs are turning record profits during this time, you see that everyone is not being held to the same standard. Most people have a sense of just basic fair play. I want to go to work. I want to do work that matters. I want to be treated with dignity. I want to be paid a fair wage for it. And I want to feel like my hard work gets something, not there is a system above which I cannot go, but I can see other people participating in it. That upsets people. And it upsets people when it's the economy, and it upsets people when it's our justice system. We don't like it to see that there are two different systems. So accountability and affordability are linked. It makes them sort of brothers in a way. Like, what we need is one system that works for everyone. And we have not had that for a very long time. And our affordability crisis is the root of it is the same as our crisis of accountability, because some people are able to just obey different rules than the rest of us.
Listen, sign me up. Why is nobody saying that in the party right now?
I don't know. Listen, we're going to get there. I mean, look, I genuinely believe that people, it's so interesting because it's like, for those of us who are really following this, we're like, I'm working with Charles Booker right now, who's running for Senate in Kentucky. And so I feel like these midterms could not come soon enough.
Yeah.
A lot of people haven't even started thinking about them yet, right? The message that is going to feel like the thing that wins the midterms for the Democrats, I don't even think it's been identified yet. Like someone was asking the other day, 2028 is already underway. Like, if people aren't in the conversation, are they like, we will get people that come so close to winning in a red state this year that they will become front runners overnight for 2028. We don't know what the message is that people are going to gravitate to and really push right now. So I think some of it is literally just time. I think people need to start talking about this, figure out where they stand with it. But I think that if we are able to connect these two things, because for a lot of people, they feel the same. They wouldn't necessarily articulate it that way, but they say affordability in the same sentence with Epstein, and because it feels similar. And we need to help people articulate that golden thread, what it is you're asking for. And it's really basic. We're just asking for a fair system that works for everybody one way.
Right. we should talk, because you mentioned the midterms here. We should talk about Louisiana v. Calais here, because it's going to
Yes.
impact the future of the Democratic Party, specifically in the South. It's going to impact the representation of Black and Brown Americans in Congress, without a doubt. That is going to change,
Yeah.
and that's going to dilute the power of the Democratic Party overall. So, what happens here? I mean, how does the Democratic Party push back on that, while also having to tread this line, well, without seeming overly radical? Because I know the conversations that are happening right now are blowing up the filibuster and packing the court. And those may need to happen to overcome some of these things now, to overcome a Supreme Court that has clearly overridden what Congress designed and the spirit of what
Yes.
was in the VRA. But that's going to be too much for a lot of people. So how does the Democratic Party walk that line?
I think we have to start now talking about this as what it really is. This would be unpacking the court. I don't think we've ever fully at the time that Mitch McConnell decided that he wouldn't even meet with Barack Obama's nominee for the Supreme Court, smart money was that Hillary Clinton was going to win.
Yeah.
And so people basically said, fine, if you want to wait out the election, fine. And then, we'll have a different Congress and we won't even have to negotiate with you that much. And we made it about the outcome and not the process. The decision of a Senate majority leader to say publicly, we're not even going to meet with this person. The job was to advise and consent, and they abdicated that responsibility wholly.
Mhm.
We should have burned the air. Like, there should not have been a moment that we were not talking about what a complete betrayal that was, to the point that no one should have been able to get reelected if they did not put Gorsuch on the court, right?
Mhm.
Like, I just, or I'm sorry, not Gorsuch.
Garland. Yeah.
Garland, thank you.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Management. Yeah.
That should have been a this far, no further moment, and it wasn't. But because of that, we're now in a situation where we have a court that is illegitimate, but wasn't getting talked about like that. So I feel like we need to because part of what scares people is that people are like, well, this is so extreme and this is so out of the bounds. The bounds were broken. We have to get people to understand that this is a response. And I think we can take some comfort from recent events. When Trump said, hey, Texas, redraw your maps and let's try to get more seats. Democrats said, okay, well, if you do that, we're going to do it in California, we're going to do it in Virginia. And there were a lot of people who were like, hey, come on, you guys, we're the ones who are anti-gerrymandering and we're the ones trying to get fair redistricting. And voters and leaders said, no, we're not going to keep letting one party play by one set of rules and us just sort of giving up the ghost and letting them do it, but we're not going to fight back.
Right.
I think that this has to be another one of those moments. The idea that the Voting Rights Act can be struck down by the Supreme Court in a way that it's what you said. It's so clearly, this is not, normally if the Supreme Court guts a piece of legislation, the response is, well, yeah, but then you need to go to Congress and fix it. The problem is they're gutting something when it was clearly the desire of Congress to do the thing that the bill had been doing.
Right.
And they just decided to reverse it. They've gone against the will of Congress and against the will of the people.
Right. Not once by Congress, but twice, in 1982 and in 2006. So they didn't just affirm it 40 years ago, but they did it 20 years ago.
Right. Recently, in a world that looks much more like today's, they said, yep, this is still critically important. That means that we need to be talking about this as the reversal that it is, as the illegitimate act that it is. And so blowing up the filibuster and packing the court might sound extreme, but if you have an illegitimate court that has decided to upend the will of Congress and the people, which is not the role of the Supreme Court, then getting rid of the filibuster so that we can unpack an unfairly designed court sounds a lot more reasonable. So I think we have to start talking about this in the context of what we're really talking about and say the things that are on the table have to be big enough to match the thing that was stolen.
Radical problems have radical solutions.
Exactly.
Kind of a thing. I also want to know how you're sitting and feeling right now, or sitting with this Callais decision, because it takes us back 40 years, if not longer. I mean, I said in the podcast, we're talking a week before this is going to air. So I said in the podcast yesterday for us, but last week for listeners, that this will allow many states in the South to govern in a way that we have not seen since they tried to make Rosa Parks sit in the back of a bus.
Right.
And I'm a white guy in Michigan who has no experience living as a black person in the United States. And I want to know how you're sitting with this right now, because it has to be different for you.
Yeah, this was a devastating decision. And for folks that are not following as closely, this is essentially, the Voting Rights Act has existed for the purpose of making sure that states were not drawing maps in a way to dilute the voting power of specifically black voters. That this is something that came out of Reconstruction that was happening a lot. It was that you could draw lines in a way that, black voters would be unable to to vote for people who represented them. And so the Voting Rights Act was created to correct for that and has worked for 40 years in doing that. What the decision that they ruled this week says is essentially that a state can draw its maps and have the impact of massively diluting the voice and vote of black voters, as long as that was not the stated motivation.
Right.
Which is just it's a hands down bonkers thing to say. Yeah. Because especially because we are now in a situation where political gerrymandering is allowed. So all you have to do is say, we're just gerrymandering Democrats out, not black people. And in the South, that Venn diagram is essentially a circle, and it has the impact of, we are going to lose a significant amount of black leadership in the South. And we are going to lose, black voters will lose the ability to meaningfully have their voice heard in elections, which harkens back to an era of Jim Crow that 20 years ago, no party would have celebrated. 20 years ago, George W. Bush was there with Sheila Jackson, celebrating the reauthorization. This was the shift here that this is now being celebrated by the Republican Party. That is a deep shift in the way that we've talked about this issue. And so, we are going to lose a lot of black leaders in elected office, and we are going to deal with a psychic disenfranchisement of a lot of black voters in a moment that people need to feel like their voices matter. This one was really, really hard. And I am scared for what it's going to mean moving forward.
Today's episode is brought to you by Ground News, which is something that I wish was around when I first started getting interested in and covering politics. I know it seems like common sense now, but it's really hard to sift through all the news that is out there, because the same story can be completely different depending on who and where you're reading it from. That's where Ground News comes in. They give you all the versions of the story right in your feed, left, right, and center. They show you those side by side so you can see how the framing changes and you get a full view of the story. They also have a blind spot feed that flags stories that are being ignored by one side of the aisle entirely. In a media landscape built to keep you in an echo chamber, Ground News shows you the way out. And right now you can use the link in the description for 40% off. It is their best deal on their best plan. That's the Vantage plan right now. You can only get it from Make It Make Sense. Get access to their blind spot feed, more than 50,000 unique outlets for news, and one of my favorite features is their Burst Your Bubble newsletter, which helps you break out of that echo chamber and shows you your own media bias for all the things that you consume. I think it is an invaluable resource to expose you to different ideas and help keep your own media diet healthy, because a healthy media diet is just as important as a regular diet. Again, use the exclusive code in the description to get 40% off the Ground News Vantage plan, their absolute best plan right now. I want to switch right now to your book, to the new book that's out, talking about authentic candidates that can meet this moment. Walk me through the ideas that are in this to kind of combat against these things, because I think that there's some real optimism in this, which in this moment is hard to find.
I would love to talk about the things we can feel optimistic about in this moment, because it's kind of an obsession of mine. So the book, The Real Ones, honestly, it came out of a lot of the work that I was doing in 2020. I was Julian Castro's campaign manager for his presidential run in 2020. And then when we withdrew, I went to go be a senior advisor for Senator Warren. And one of the things that struck me was 2020 was, in a lot of ways, a very similar race to the one I think we're going to see in 28, because there was no incumbent. So a lot of people jumped in. So there was a lot of, everyone's kind of looking for a lane. So there was a lot of talk about identity and who could showcase the thing that voters were looking for. And we talk about authenticity in politics all the time. It is like the thing you need, but no one ever defines it. And whenever something means everything and nothing, there's so much room for bias. What I noticed was that this question of authenticity got asked differently of the candidates of color and the women of any race. And the tough thing about that is, when we think about someone who is presidential, we have so many models for a white guy. You can be the retired general who's gruff but fair, and the wordsmith and the policy wonk, you have so many different things you could fit into. We have fewer of those for candidates of color. We have fewer of those for women of any race. And that means it is very easy for me to see candidates I'm less used to seeing as inauthentic, because I basically only have one model for them.
Right.
So we're already using this metric that feels like it has as a true zero, white and male, as that's what you need to be, right? And when authentic means I'm allowed to go, I don't know, she just doesn't strike me as authentic, and not really have to problematize that, it is very easy to let that bias slip in. And then you think about the fact that colloquially, when we say authentic, what we want to see is somebody who's willing to sort of just go out and be unscripted, unprepared. Well, there are some people that are very comfortable doing that, because they know that if they misspeak, we'll call it a gaffe and it's going to be fine.
Right.
But there are some people that if they misspeak, we're going to go, that's because she didn't know the policy. And it's a subtle shift. And again, we don't ever say the reasons for that. But the fact that there are people who will say, look, I don't even like Donald Trump, but he does come across as authentic, even though he lies as quickly as he does anything else.
Sure.
We're obviously not talking about genuineness, but there is something about his willingness to go off and speak extemporaneously about anything, which you have the freedom to do if the next day everyone goes, well, yeah, but what he really meant was blah, 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 and it's okay, and he's allowed to word salad and will, sane wash it, right?
Right.
But when Kamala Harris goes out and says that the child tax credit cut child poverty in half, and CBS fact checks her and says, actually, it was only 45%, those are very different, right? If she can get, because there's this idea that, well, but what if she doesn't really know the policy? And I heard she wasn't really even involved in that many meetings, and all of those whispers. And then but now she's just too scripted, so I don't trust her. But we hold her to a different standard. And that's the tough thing about a concept like authenticity that bakes in all this other stuff. And then we say, I need to know that you're being authentic. What am I really asking for? Because very often what I'm saying is I need somebody who feels comfortable misspeaking in public and knowing that they will still be read as qualified. And that is going to give me a very narrow set of candidates to deal with. So that those were some of the ideas that kind of came
Yeah.
when I was sort of deciding to write the book. That's what I was struggling with.
So what did you end up landing on then for what should be our ideas of what authenticity are? Because as you're explaining this thing, when I think about it, I think about somebody who is more like authentically empathetic, somebody that even if I understand that they're going to make a gaffe, or there's a lot of emphasis on like whether they know the policies or whatever, and they might they might say 45% and it's actually 50% or vice versa or whatever, right? But that their aim in that thing was probably authentically right, or that they're a little uncomfortable in crowds they're not normally in, which is any number of candidates in any number of rallies or town halls I've ever
Yes.
been to, right? Because like not for nothing, politicians tend to be kind of weirder people than the general public. I think you
Yes.
have to be by
You
nature.
have to be.
Just a little bit off, right? It's not bad; they just are. But like it, I think that there's an authenticity to maybe the passion to be an elected official, to want to work for people, that does come across with some people and doesn't for others. And is that the kind of thing you're talking about, or am I like way off base?
No, 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 no. I think what you're describing is exactly what I think. If we have to define authentic, it actually winds up getting us to land on what we're actually looking for. But
Hmm.
when we just sort of use it as a shorthand for a bunch of stuff, that's, I think, when we get sort of tripped up. Because if you
Sure.
say, yeah, somebody who's authentically empathetic, and so when they hear a story, this is how they come across, or, someone who, like, actually, I kind of appreciate it if they feel a little uncomfortable in a crowd because
Yeah.
that makes me, right? That is not something that we would necessarily go, oh, yes, authenticity like that, right? So
Yeah.
I think what it is it's take it to the next step. That's what I think we do. We unpack this term that has started to mean just sort of a catch all for a set of things that can just so easily get slapped onto some people and denied other people without thinking about what we're saying. I think we need to spend a little bit more time identifying what it is and then saying, like, okay, because sometimes I'll say, authenticity, like part of what it is I want to know that your values today are your real values.
Hmm.
What does that mean? Because
Yeah.
I'm actually comfortable with the idea that you thought something different and then you listened to passionate people who knew more than you did and you changed your mind.
Right.
I actually would love it to know that you're capable of doing that. I would vote for you again if so it's like,
Right.
it's like there's this idea that I have about, like, well, that is authentic and that's what I'm kind of asking for. But then when I think about it, it's like, well, no, actually, I don't need you to have had the same. I don't expect you to have had 2026 values for your entire life. Like,
Mhm.
I want you, I want to know that that evolution happened. I'd like to know that that evolution happened because you cared and not just political expedience. Maybe that's what I'm asking for, right? So, and that's it. I think it's just that when we think about what it really is, like, it authentic means a lot of stuff, and it doesn't necessarily mean the stuff that we think it does when we just say, well, that person comes across as authentic. A lot of times what comes across as authentic is some of the bluster that we'd actually go, I don't want somebody who acts like that. Like,
Right.
I want you to trip over your words because you're aiming at the truth. If you are able to speak off the cuff that well, is that because because you're just good at that, or is that, you know what I mean? Like, is
Yes.
that rehearsed? Is that so? I think that's it. We just need to grapple with it a little more.
So it strikes me that there are probably three conversations about authenticity that have to happen at three different levels here. The first one is with candidates. The next one is probably with people like me, with the media and how we talk about candidate authenticity. And then voters probably have to do some introspection about what they think about that. But you work with candidates, right? You work with
Yes.
people running for office. So how do you have conversations about authenticity through this lens then with them, about how they can portray that?
Right. So I think one of the things that I have tried to get candidates to to be willing to do is be honest about the ways when they are stilted or they might not be
Mm.
coming across in a way that people are used to. If you are uncomfortable in front of crowds, if you are an introvert, people want to hear that kind of thing. Telling the like meta story, the underlying thing, in a way, a lot of times actually helps. One of the things that Julian struggled with a lot was people did sort of read him as, it was like he wasn't going to just hop on an Instagram live. He wanted to
Yeah.
be more scripted. He wanted, and this was again 2020. Beto became like who he was
Uh-huh.
because of his willingness to just jump in front of a camera, talk to anyone, and that comparison really hurt Secretary Castro by
Mhm.
like that the comparison was like, why aren't you like that? And I remember there was one interview where essentially he got asked this again because he would get asked it a lot, and he said, I, I was raised by a mother who was, first generation immigrant. I think a lot of people have this same experience. Second generation, it was like, we didn't learn Spanish. We
Right.
didn't, she was very adamant about saying, if these are the kinds of things you want to do, they're already not expecting to see you. So you can't give them another reason to write you off.
Right.
So, yes, I am going to prepare for things. Like, I don't want to not be in a suit and tie in front of, and I get that that's why sometimes people think I come across as it seems inauthentic, but for a lot of us, that is the most authentic experience of having grown up the way we did. And I
Yeah.
thought it was such a great response because it told the underlying thing instead of going, "Oh no, I don't know. I'm a lot cooler than you think I am." He just explained this. I know how I come across, but this is the reason. People have the capacity to hear that.
Yeah.
People understand that we all have different experiences. And I think it's the same thing in storytelling. They say go hyper specific, and that's how you appeal to more people.
Mhm.
Don't try to be universal because it's going to be so broad nobody resonates with it. Instead, or doesn't resonate with anyone. Instead, go for a specific story, and the human elements of that, the universal elements, will come out. Tell your story. Explain why the thing that people think about you isn't real, and the universality of that will come out through it.
Sure. It thinking of Secretary Castro, I can't remember where it was, but one of the best moments that I remember ever seeing him in, and it was one of those moments for me where, like, when you see a leader or an elected official be like, oh, that's why they're there, like that's how they got to where they are.
Yeah.
He was listening to a mother and her child, and he was just talking to them. And it was in a town hall. Like, there was a lot of people around them, but he was so good at that little connection right there. And I remember thinking of him as being a little more introverted, maybe bookish even. I don't know
Yeah.
if he thinks of himself that way, but like I remember him coming across that way. But in that moment being like, oh, this is the thing he's good at. He's not
Yeah.
Beto O'Rourke. He's not going to hop on an IG live and speak a bunch of Spanish, right? He's not going to whip up a crowd like that, but he's really good right here.
Right.
And I think even in the moments when I worked in Boston for a little while, and when Liz Warren would be at places, she can get a crowd going too, but she's also really, really good at the intimate moments and those
Yeah.
small things. And those small moments of authenticity, if you're not a leader or an elected official or a politician running for these things who can get a crowd going, the authenticity of those moments, I think, also resonates with people who in the
Right.
moment right now, especially when people really want someone to feel their pain. If you can make those small, very hyper specific moments feel or be your authentic story, that fits kind of what we're talking about here. I think that's a really
Right.
interesting idea, especially coming as a foil to the spectacle that is Donald Trump and MAGA and all the things that come with that.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And I think that's the other advice that I would give to candidates is figure out ways to showcase those moments. I think for a very long time, we have relied on legacy media as such a gatekeeper. And that is
Mm.
such a tough thing because a lot of it is trained to identify one type of like, we see
Sure.
authenticity this way. And this is how you get the cable interview that leads to the fundraising bump that leads to.
Right.
And instead, using social media and using your own channels, talk directly to voters, get videos of those. If you're good in long form, get on YouTube. If you need a series of vignettes where as a candidate, you're speaking with a mother and a child and you're in a big crowd, but you're connecting there, let people see that. We now have a lot of ways for people to reach their audiences. And I think finding the way to do that and relying less on some of those gatekeepers that really will only be able to metabolize a certain vision of authenticity that not everyone is going to hit the same metrics on.
Right. Well, Maya, thank you so much for being here. I really appreciate it.
Thank you. I'm so glad we got to have this conversation. I really appreciate you.
I want to thank Maya again for coming on the show. You can find a link to her brand new book in the description for this episode. And that is it for today's episode. Please rate and review wherever you get your podcast. Like, subscribe, share this episode if it helped you make a little bit of sense about what's happening with the Democratic Party right now. Share it with somebody else who might be needing to have this conversation or has been thinking about this too. And as always, sign up for the Make It Make Sense Substack and share the show on social media. You can tag me at Grant Hermes on Twitter and Blue Sky and at Grant_Hermes on everything else. Thank you so much for watching today. I'm Grant Hermes, and I'll talk to you next time.